you can change people's lives, you could have an impact. We were going through an institution building phase. So it was small things that slowly changed the culture in the organization. I ran a ministry of 220 people and sort of tried to build this mindset that we're all together in this.
Let's dig into this participatory leadership. How quickly were you aware of it as a concept?
Well,
Bernard Nikaj is a professor, former ambassador to the EU and NATO, and ex-minister of trade, turning decades of public policy, diplomacy, and e-government experience into practical insights for stronger institutions.
participation, as I said, is a mindset. You involve people in the processes of decision making. I think what's important for leaders is that they lead the way to a new mentality.
Being participative and collaborative takes more work. What can people do to keep re-energizing themselves as well as the approach?
Well, I think
Hello, Bernard. Welcome to The Power Between.
Hello, Roddy. It's very nice to be here. It's an honor for me and a pleasure.
I'm delighted to be speaking with you today, Bernard. You are these days a professor at RIT Kosovo, which is a private university in Pristina, which I think was originally known as the American University in Kosovo. Is that right? But it's got the RIT stands for Rochester Institute of Technology. Is that right? So it's got strong connections through to the US.
A.U.K was founded as a university out of USA donor money after the war as a contribution to improving education and providing quality education to Kosovo students, which in time developed strong ties with RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. And after this cooperation seemed to be very good, Rochester took over. So we're officially part of the Rochester Institute of Technology, and we called Kosovo campus because RIT has campuses in different places in the world. It's a not-for-profit institution that provides good quality education to Kosovo students.
And it's all taught in English, is that right?
It's all taught in English, yes. We follow the same curricula and the same rules as do people in Rochester and in other campuses around the world. So it's the same program, it's the same system, and that's, I think, the added value, because our students are able to move between campuses according to their interests, but also pursue further education both in US and in other Western countries.
A great institution. That speaking in English part is a sort of leveler. It allows everyone to come from different parts of Southeast Europe, presumably.
We attract a lot of students from the region, but also we get a lot of exchange students. There's students that come over from the States, do a semester. Some of them decide to stay for longer. There's students that come from Middle East because there's a campus in the Emirates as well. So we get a nice mix of students, which sort of enriches the discussion and the student experience also for the students from Kosovo itself.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we'll come back to that. But the reason perhaps we're speaking today is that prior to your current role, you had this extraordinary and distinguished career starting at a very young age in the Kosovan government and diplomatic service. We spoke earlier, I sort of likened this experience to being a bit like working for a startup, but in this case it was a government startup, as Kosovo is Europe's youngest country, having only declared independence in 2008, I think it was. Is that right? And this has given you a sort of special insight into managing and navigating power and authority and hierarchy. And your focus these days is on participative leadership. I'd really like to explore further with you, but perhaps before we start that, if you could give us a very brief, because I know it's complicated, but a brief description of your journey into government and becoming Kosovan ambassador to the EU. And in fact, it wasn't just the EU, was it? It was also NATO, Belgium and Luxembourg, which is quite a lot of responsibility for someone who is in their early 30s.
I think, as you mentioned, Kosovo is Europe's youngest country. So being the youngest country then, and having come out of the conflict, having come out of 10 years of a sort of an apartheid, because during the 90s, most of the public administration who were Albanians were thrown out of their jobs by then Milosevic regime. It meant that once we declared independence, sort of opened a space for a lot of young people who were coming into administration, into politics, into leadership roles. And I was lucky to be one of those. I started off being the chief of staff for the deputy prime minister for the economy and the minister of trade. And then very soon after, I took over the role of the deputy minister for trade, and I was in charge of negotiating the Stabilization Association Agreement with European Union, which for my ministry meant negotiating all the trade bits, which was about 80% of the agreement. And then my boss became a mayor in one of the cities in Kosovo, Jakova, and I took over. And I became the Minister of Trade, finalized these trade negotiations, worked a lot on improving the business climate, foreign investment, support to businesses. And then when that was over, away to California at Berkeley, I was a Fulbright scholar, a visiting professor there for about 6 months. And when I came back, I was offered become Kosovo's ambassador to Brussels, building on this experience I had with the EU. But being Kosovo's ambassador to Brussels is a peculiar role because you wear 4 hats. Because of our specific arrangement, I will not go into. The Kosovo ambassador in Brussels plays the role of the ambassador to EU, NATO, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So it meant I was exposed to this great privilege job in Brussels, leading Kosovo's relations with the EU, which was the biggest part of my job, working on issues around our path towards European Union, but also more specific things on the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. As you might know, we still have these unresolved issues, but many other things in relations to NATO and to all these other things. So that's in short, I think.
No, I think you've done very well to condense it down into that. But I mean, what does come through, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I like this analogy to it being a startup, because I mean, things obviously moved very fast at that stage. The government was putting in new structure, people were moving into new roles as it expanded, and stability sort of began to take place after the troubles of the previous decade. And so these opportunities come through very quickly, which means that you know, that each new role you were taking on, you'd only had the previous role for a matter of months, probably, or you know, just a year and a bit. So that progression happened very fast. So your learning curve must have been extraordinary in terms of.
Also, look, in a country which is as young as Kosovo, you don't have also a lot of legacy to build on. For example, I was the chief of staff for about 2 years. I was a deputy minister for 6 months and a minister for about 1.5 years. Then I became ambassador, and I was ambassador for 5 years. But if you look at it, I was only ever the 3rd Kosovo ambassador to Brussels. I was only the 4th or the 5th, I'm not sure, Minister of Trade and Industry since Kosovo became under UN and also an independent country. So there's not a lot of legacy to build on, which is in one sense a shortcoming, but it's also an opportunity. And to link to your startup analogy, I think it's very right, because you do many things for the first time. You know, you cannot look into prior experiences and say, okay, let's see how we negotiated with European Union before. Let's see what went right, what went wrong, and let's build on it. So most of the knowledge that we got was by talking to other countries who went through the similar processes, which is very helpful, but it's never the same, because it doesn't account for the context. It doesn't account for the quality of the institutions we had, because as we were doing all these state building things, we're also going through an institution building phase, which means sort of building the civil service, trying to attract capable people in these positions, working on programs to educate future generations of people who will work in the public administration, which is many different processes at the same time that other countries had years and ages to go through. So it's a very dynamic situation, but it's also a situation that provides a lot of opportunity to build, develop, learn new stuff, and be exposed to things that maybe in other contexts would take much longer to come through.
I think that lack of legacy structure, lack of legacy process is probably, you know, one of the key things in that startup analogy. It allows you to do things differently. But you're also there, I suppose, with what's known as the beginner's mindset. So, the novice's mindset. So to a large extent, you probably don't know what you don't know, and so you're trying things in ways that if you'd been in the British civil service or something, there'd be a whole group of people going, "So no, sir, you can't do it that way. No, that doesn't work." And there isn't that restriction, which allows you to try stuff differently, which is empowering and exciting, but does also create lots of opportunity.
I think that's the main difference. That when we speak about institutional setup, it empowers you, but it also constrains you very often when it's very well established with a long tradition of how the things are run, like the British civil service. Now, what was the added value is that for me in these leadership positions, I could sort of go a bit beyond things like this. That's where all this participatory thing sort of started through in my mind, but also in my practice, was to sort of try to build teams with people who can deliver on these things that we were faced on, but also who will continue these things, because I had positions which were politically appointed, which meant I was there for a very a limited amount of time, and I needed to make sure that what you're very interested in, this mid-level managers can take over and take it to the next step, even when you're gone. And you can only do that if you involve people in the processes of decision making, if you build teams that can work together and that can sort of learn how to move forward with their own leadership. For example, I remember when we were making the negotiation team for negotiating trade agreements with European Union, I was able to go to each of the minister in other ministries, because I knew people from before, to say, look, I need this guy or this lady in my team because we're doing something that's very important for our country. And it sort of skips a lot of bureaucratic procedures that you would see in other countries, but was very useful because we were very successful in these negotiations. So we did it for 6 months, which was the fastest period any country went through an SAA a negotiation, and it was able because of the team and the this startup attitude that we had to how we get things done. It was similar in when I became an ambassador. I inherited an embassy with about 6 diplomats. By the time I left, we had an embassy of like 15. But because we had very clear goals, we could operate sort of much more flexibly, be more agile as part of the team and as part of institution.
And did you notice over that period? I mean, obviously, as things grow and processes inevitably have to come into place and be put in place, that flexibility starts to reduce. Did the speed of change, the rate of change, sort of begin to slow down? Do you think? Or
I think that's one of the realizations that happened to us. It was because when we declared independence and Kosovo was formed as a government, we thought that we can learn from other experience and not repeat some of the mistakes, but also some of the shortcomings that other countries did. What was amazing was that how fast you build this legacy, and unfortunately you end up repeating some of the things that you thought will not repeat. And it's due to different factors. If you take an institution, because these are young institutions, you are able to attract a lot of new, enthusiastic, capable professionals to work in, but the rate of turnover is also very high. And then the ones that remain build this legacy quite faster than you would think this builds. And also because of the politics of it and the politics of public institutions, it very much depends on the leaders on the top and their approach to the organization and to the leadership of the organizations. And that's, other people come, elections produce different results, and then different mindsets not necessarily continue that progression of things. So I think today the legacy, the system is much higher. It's not as startup as it was. I think in some areas, some of the people, some of the middle managers that I've worked with have moved to higher positions. They continue to practice some of this participatory mindset, because if I think of participatory leadership, as much as it's a technique, it's much more a mindset of how you involve people, how you take decisions, how you build capacity, how you communicate with the outside, and how you communicate with the inside. So there's many of those people that continue to be in important positions in the government, but then at the meantime, there's been a lot of changes across the board.
I mean, let's dig into this I can't say it either. Participatory leadership. It's I mean, as you say, it's a mindset. How quickly were you aware of it as a concept, that was something that you needed to create?
I'm a student of governance. I am a professor of governance, and I've had gone through it as a sort of a theoretical approach to doing things, And back in the day, there was this onset of technology, which was very much about flattening the organization, which was very much about participation on so many different levels. And when I came to leadership positions, I sort of thought, look, I think I am a strong believer that in institutions, institutions are as good as the teams that work in them and the teams that run them. So even though I was at the top of a hierarchy, maybe I did not see myself to say, look, it's only me who's important and the rest, forget about the rest. So I try to build good teams and to involve them in things early on. And I saw that we're producing results. For example, one of the early things that I was leading as a chief of staff for the deputy prime minister, there was this business environment indicators that World Bank used to produce every year for every country in the world. And when we came to the ministry, we were ranked 126th in the world. So we set out to fix our ranking because it was very important for the image of Kosovo as a young country and everything. So I ran an intergovernmental team that was cutting across sectors, and we managed through a bit of this leadership where we involved everybody, when we made sure that people understand the importance of what we're doing, that they are heard, that they have ownership, to improve by 60 places in 2 years. So when I left, we went from 128 to 63rd. And that was my first experience that I sort of replicated going into other roles, trade negotiations, talking to businesses. I always thought, politicians or people, leaders of public institutions can get a bit into a cocoon, that they don't understand what's happening out there. So I spend a lot of time with the stakeholders or the beneficiaries of the policies that we were doing to sort of understand what they're thinking, where's it going, and slowly developed this approach, but also this profile that people thought, oh, I can sort of go to him and he'll hear me out. And that was sort of the fundamental of this, both within the organization and abroad. And especially when you're in positions like minister and things like that, inherently people are a bit distant, but I sort of tried to cut this distance even with my staff. I ran a ministry of 220 people, but I would walk through the ministry, go see them in their offices, invite them to my office, and sort of try to build this mindset that we're all together in this, and have this participation in decision making.
So, I mean, there's that making yourself accessible and not sort of making yourself a sort of elite ivory tower type figure, I suppose. That draws you into the group, the team, and it's also explaining the the clear objective of where you're trying to get to, so everyone knows that they're. And it always surprises me how partly difficult that is, but also how rare it is that people sort of fully understand what they're trying to achieve in the wider sense. They may know their specific task, but seeing where that fits into the broader task is something that is important to communicate with people, so that they understand that role. And I think that that makes you much more participative too. Is that correct?
Yes, because look, I think there's different approaches to this leadership. You can sort of sit in an office and say, look, I'm a minister, I've signed this decree, and people have to obey, because maybe legally and hierarchically they have to. And that's their approach. But for me, I thought it's important for them to understand why we're doing this beyond our small 8 to 4 jobs in a ministry. But I wanted them to be proud. For example, look, as I said, Kosovo has during that time done some of the things for the first time in the history of its existence. It will never do that again. It will never negotiate an SA with European Union, and many other things. For example, when I was ambassador, I led Kosovo's membership to International Customs Organization, which is one of the biggest international organizations. So these are things that you do once. And I wanted everybody to feel that their job is part of a larger success, but that they can also be proud of it. I think that was an extra incentive for them to say, look, yeah, my working hours are finished at 4, but maybe I stay until 5 or 6 because there's a higher purpose to what we're doing. And I thought it's my job to explain, involve, and make sure that they are heard in this larger process.
Presumably, that explaining that and clarifying that is to an extent easier when you're doing lots of new things and you're in that startup phase. I mean, I like then this is usually applies to commercial organizations or possibly not for profits, but I haven't heard of it, of course, in terms of government before. But you have explorers and then pioneers and settlers and town planners. And the entrepreneur is somewhere between. He's probably more the pioneer than the explorer. The explorer's the inventor. The pioneer goes out and tries to sort of create an initial structure around it. The settler comes and builds on that, so he's probably the one who makes the initial amount of money. And then the town planners come in and they turn it into a massive organization. And often they're the ones who are the least innovative, but they create the force and the structure around it. I wonder, on that progression through the growth of an organization, do you think it becomes more difficult to be a participative leader? I mean, when you've got a small group around you and the objective is very clear and you're only focused on one relatively sort of tight idea, then is that easier than when it becomes bigger?
I believe it becomes harder, but I don't think it becomes impossible, because it might, the smaller the organization, the more participation you have. But I think if you install this mindset of participation and participatory governance and leadership, I think it grows as the structure grows, meaning that participation can still be part of a mindset of a certain department in the organization. They might not be meeting let's say, the minister all the time, but still it sort of drills down from the top to bottom. And participation, as I said, is a mindset. You can do it if you run a team of 3 people, or if you run a team of 300 people. Of course, with 3 people it's much easier, but you can still sort of have that mindset in an organization of 300 people. Now, one big advantage to this is that There's so much technology that has in the meantime come into this, platforms, tools, and things like that. So technology has enabled us to be much more participatory than we've been before. So it depends on the style, and it depends on the mindset of the leaders, and that's something that we try to transfer to current future leaders, to say, look, there's not one form that you have to follow, but you can install a mindset. Of course, I think with time, with legacy, it becomes much easier to be participatory in commercial organizations, startups, maybe NGOs, not for profits, and harder in governments, much harder than my time in this startup phase, because the bulk of legacy builds very fast in government, not only internally but also from the integration of the country in different things. I negotiated our relationship with in trade with the European Union. Now that's a legacy, and that refrains you a bit further into things what you can do and you can do. And in the meantime, there's many other things that have come. But I think it does not need to discourage leaders from striving to have this mindset.
And is it possible to shake that up a bit? I mean, if that sort of, I don't know what the word is, a sort of ossifying of, the things becoming a little bit stiffer, a little, inside, less agile. Is there a way to loosen it up? I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, if you're coming into an organization that is quite structural and lacking that agility, to create that mindset, how might one go about that?
I'll tell you a story of what I did when I became ambassador. When you are appointed to an ambassadorship, it means that you inherit an embassy from your predecessor, which has the staff, and you cannot decide on a lot of structural things, at least in the beginning, because diplomats are appointed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and stuff like this. And of course, when you inherit an organization, you always inherit a bit of a culture, So what I did when I went to Brussels, I sort of took a bit of time to hear everybody what they're doing. So I did not go and say, look, this is me, this is how I want to do things. But I took about 3 weeks, met all my diplomats. It was, again, easy because it was like 10 people in total. Met each and every one of them, sort of listened to what they've done, what they thought was right, what they thought could be done better, what they feel they can do differently themselves in the organization and organization as a whole. And then after about 3 weeks, I sort of started changing things with my own example, because I think what's important for leaders is that they lead the way to a new mentality. Might sound very simple, but the first thing I said to the team, look, I'm going to share my calendar with all of you. And you're all invited to contribute to my calendar, which was not a practice before. So they felt that they are part of this team where I'm being transparent to them, and I'm not just asking them to be transparent with me. And then I also installed a culture to say to them, look, if we are to be successful, we will be successful as an embassy, as an organization, and then we can claim individual success for each and every one of us. Unless we're successful as an organization, we will not be able to say, look, the organization is failing, but look at me, I'm a very successful diplomat or a very successful ambassador. So it was small things that slowly changed the culture and the behavior in the organization. And then I made sure that every new person, because diplomats rotate, every new person coming to the embassy sort of signs up to this mindset that we had as a team. So I think it's possible, even in these stiff, as you say, organizations, to do it. Might take a bit longer, but it starts with the mindset of the leaders at whatever level, mid-level, low-level managers, but also leaders of the institutions. And if you really subscribe to this, you can do it with small things, with leading the way, with showing an example, and then people adjust, adapt to these forms of leadership.
I mean, that's fascinating. I think that calendar example is brilliant, really, because I mean, I suppose the concern that people might have about shifting from that sort of slightly command control authoritarian type leader, if that's what there had been previously, to a more participative, accessible, collaborative one, is that it comes across as a sign of weakness. That's the sort of fear that might prevent them from doing it. And whereas, in fact, we know it's really a sign of strength to be able to do that. But the idea about sharing your calendar, I don't think that can be construed as being weak at all. That shows that you're very comfortable in your position, and that you're happy to do that. And it's those sort of little, as you say, it's the small things that set that tone, isn't it? You can make grandiose sort of mission statements and whatever, but it's the little things you actually do that have the impact.
And I think at the end of the day, things like this is also about managing the power dynamics, because in organizations, mid managers and top level managers develop a power dynamic. For example, when I came to the embassy, I understood that there was a power dynamic, and the value of it was the information. So each of the people who were covering different things thought that by having this one-on-one relationship with the ambassador will sort of make them more powerful in the organization. And I sort of flattened that to say, like, look, you each and everyone have your different responsibilities. You have the full control of them. I will also share with you what I think about things, but you can also not have to be afraid that somebody else will sort of interfere in your area if we are very clear on this. And I led by this example to sort of be very transparent to them and be very sort of inclusive as well. Whenever the protocol allowed, I always took my staff members with me to the meetings, because I was confident that we can do it better together if they're involved. And then it became a practice, became a team, really a team thing. And I'm proud because very many of my staff from the days in the meantime became ambassadors after, and they all sort of praise this experience we did while we worked together in the embassy.
I mean, do you think, from what you can see now, that it does endure? Does that mindset, is it prevalent in Kosovan ambassadors around the world? I mean,
as much as it was able to be spread, I think a lot of the people who we work together with are trying to do that. For example, the current ambassador to Australia is a dear colleague. The current chargé to Austria is a dear colleague, and many people from that time. Some of them left the diplomatic service, of course, but I think there was a replication of that as much as it was possible. I would not say it's prevalent across the board because of the institutional changes that were happening, but I like to think that with the whole team of the embassy in Brussels back in the day, sort of set an example to other parts of the diplomatic service as well. I'll tell you one more example from that time. When I came to the embassy, I understood that diplomats would have important meetings, and then they will send daily reports to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I asked them, why do you do it like this? And they were like, well, we have a meeting, we write a report, and we send it. And I'm like, but this is so an information overflow. Nobody's going to read all this information. Let us set up a procedure in which we'll do a weekly report unless something is urgent. So we were the first embassy to sort of institute this format of weekly reports to send to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then the same format was copied by all the embassies in the world. And then the ministry instituted this as a form of doing it. I'm sure if a British diplomat hears this, he says, what is this guy talking about? But it's such a startup country that even things like this, that you would think, oh, there's these diplomatic cables and stuff like that, were being set up as we went along. So a bit of the practices we had in Brussels are still being followed around our
and then
diplomatic
propagate
service.
out.
Yeah.
But when you started that, when you initiated that, was the pushback from Pristina, from the ministry about where's our daily reports, or were they going, thank goodness, my
Yeah.
inbox isn't cluttering up?
No, because information is currency in diplomacy. So there was a bit of pushback. I got a call from the minister at that time to say, "What's happening?" And I sort of rationalized with him. I said, "Look, what's the point if we don't make sure that information is processed, is transmitted to other embassies, and so on and so forth?" And luckily for me, and he was a previous colleague, we were ministers together, so he understood that this has the best intention at heart, and he supported us in doing
So
it further.
there was a trust dynamic there as well.
Yeah, of course.
And that's an interesting one, because I mean, whilst obviously as ambassador you're top of that group of people within the ministry, you're more in the middle there of decision makers, even so.
Yeah.
So you were playing the mid-level role there in having to explain your justification, which shows how it can be done too.
True, and look, being Brussels continues to be one of the most important diplomatic postings for Kosovo. I think in par with Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris, Brussels is there because of the wide coverage of issues, European Union, NATO, and things like that, which meant that I had direct contact with presidents, had direct contacts with prime ministers, and also with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And differently from a lot of long-standing diplomatic practices, I think I had this advantage that you could go across normal diplomatic line and sort of phone the prime minister, phone the president. It was useful that I known them before, because I was even though very young, I had previous roles, but that was the only way to be able to respond to the daily tasks and challenges of that. And then there's always this power dynamic to below, but also to above. I had to, as much as educate my staff, if I can call educate, also show the example, but also gain the trust of the ways with the higher presidents, prime ministers. And during my time in Brussels, I had the chance to work with 4 prime ministers. So it meant that every time there was a new prime minister,
A bit like in Britain. Yeah.
similar times.
Yeah, it was similar time too, wasn't it? It was, it was when we were definitely on short prime ministerial holds at that stage. I'm interested also in this sort of idea of leadership entropy or social entropy, where the best practices begin to fray after a while unless you can maintain them. And it also, it takes energy to do these things. I think it's in a way it's easier, it's simpler to hold that sort of hierarchical, authoritative position, being participative and collaborative takes more work, I think, and that's why, and that's one of the great sort of conundrums around leadership, is that not everyone's cut out for it. It requires careful selection of individuals to be good leaders, and it's not usually because of what their expertise has been before. So, I mean, in your role as a professor, do you see that entropy happens, that it falls away, and what can people do to keep sort of re-energizing themselves as well as the approach?
Well, I think to me the approach sort of became part of my identity, so I have done various things afterwards, and I sort of approach a new challenge with a similar mindset. Even my teaching philosophy is much more inclusive in the class than you would think of a traditional sort of professor that enters the room, says what he means, and then leaves. I try to have a bit of engagement, much more engagement of the students, discussion, and things like this, to sort of engage them, not to only understand theoretical concepts, but be able to understand what's the importance of these concepts. Why do we do what we do? And I think it's not easy, especially, as I say, I think with time I've seen it that if you want to do it in business organizations or not-for-profits, where you can retain people for longer and where you're not limited to specific electoral cycles or things like that, you can propagate it much more sustainably, because you have much more time. Becomes tougher in governments because it's susceptible to terms and political cycles and things like that, and people change in the leadership roles, and some of them just refuse to say, they come from a command and control structures, and I would not like to call it old, but sort of traditional mindsets, and it's harder to propagate it. But the biggest constraint there is time. If you can do it for long enough, you'll produce enough middle managers that will sort of subscribe to that, and then they will reproduce it. As I said, for example, this reporting things still endures, even though I've not been ambassador for about 5 years.
And I think there is a sort of a virtuous circle to it. If you are doing it effectively and people feel they are purposeful and participating in a meaningful way, then they'll stay for longer in any case. Then they're happy to be in their role, and hopefully you reduce the speed of turnover, the speed of churn of people in an organization, and then that helps to embed and build that culture. So when people come in, they're having to deal with that is the culture that they're put in.
I always believed that, people stay and enjoy their being part of an organization for many different reasons than what's linked to their official pay, salary, position, and so on and so forth. And this was true, especially in the early days of Kosovo's statehood and state building, because people felt, there's bigger purpose. There's this historical moment for us as a nation, for us as a country. I thought, and I think I was successful to include them in this participatory approach, and that sort of made their time and their job even much more enjoyable, and they did not hesitate to sort of stay longer. I had a lot of diplomats who would sort of be posted for 4 years, but at the end of 4 years they would say, can I stay another year, and do things like this. And what's important is also these relationships you build. I think with many people from different organizations, I still continue to be friends with. We don't see each other as much, but we can grab an occasional coffee and sort of discuss about things, and even be consulted. What should we do? What do you think? And stuff like that. So
I've got an eye on time because bowled along our conversation meets superb. I just wonder in closing, do you miss it now that you're out of that dynamic? And what comes next, Bernard? You're still a young man.
Look, Roddy, if I said I didn't miss it, I would lie to you. I think recently read a statement about the former Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, who said the only job better than being the former Prime Minister. But I think what attracted me to public service, but also to this specific moment in the history of my country, was that you could have an impact. You could, for us, it was a historical impact. That's why I believe public service is noble and you can change people's life. You really set your mind to it. So I don't miss some bits of it, because with all this comes a lot of pressure from the public eye, media, and all these things. So it's not easy on yourself and the family, but there's bits of it that I do miss, definitely. And what's next? I don't know. I always like to think I'm ready to retire, but people keep reminding me that, maybe it's too early to retire. So I enjoy working with students. I enjoy some small things. Let's see what time brings.
I've got a huge wish, write and build stuff around the concept of elders. Don't need to be old, but they're people with experience and a wish to help the collective. People like you are very much in that role of with that experience, but you're driven by wanting to raise the whole fleet rather than just the individual boat. That's commendable and exciting. Bernard, it's been great speaking with you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roddy, for the conversation and also for the opportunity. And I look forward to seeing you in other occasions as well.
I hope we do. Thank you.